Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cincy Lawcast. Today, we're going to be continuing our law review takeover with our second of 3 episodes. So enjoy.
Hi, my name is Megan Bowling, and I'm the outgoing editor-in-chief of the University of Cincinnati Law Review. I was the editor-in-chief for Volume 92, and then for Volume 91, as a 2L, I was an associate member on the traditional track.
Hi, I'm Tess Chaffee. I was an articles editor for the Law Review last year, and I will be going into litigation after graduation here.
My name is Jacob Metzger. During my time in Law Review, I was a blog editor, and then before that, I did both the blog and the traditional track as an associate member.
I totally forgot to say what I was going to be doing. I'll be going into corporate transactional work here in Cincinnati.
Perfect. And this episode is supposed to talk about kind of the process of working together, the kind of brainstorming or the formulation of ideas and things within the room of the law review. So what does that kind of look like when you first start out, you get your track and, you've gone past the initial kind of introductions and stuff, but when you go into that room with your first idea, who do you present it to? How do you get it pushed through? How do you get approval? What does that kind of look like this year with you all as a group? How did that work out?
Yeah, so I can kind of kick that off. So for us, we went through that process, almost 2 years ago, which is pretty unbelievable. So for us, when we were 2Ls, basically we found out our track. So either you were going to be a traditional blog or hybrid, which is one per semester. And then you essentially, as you start your work, if you're on traditional track, you're assigned a notes and comments editor to guide you through that entire process. And then if you're on blog, then you're working with different blog editors as you're kind of going along. And that brainstorming process and kind of like figuring out what you want to write about really starts right away. So I'll let you guys speak to that more and kind of what that looked like for the pieces that you're going to talk a little bit in more detail about.
Yeah, so the first semester I did the traditional track, and this is going to be contrary to what the other two are going to say, but mine was a train wreck. Mine was an absolute disaster. So I had solicited a bunch of different topics from professors and all that, and I really didn't quite understand what I was doing, I think, for that first semester. I didn't think there was a lot of support at that point in really helping foster ideas because I didn't really know what I was doing when I first really got into this. I honestly think I just kind of somehow got in there, and I still don't really know how that all happened.
No, it's deserved.
But being completely candid, the first semester I really, really, really struggled. And I wrote about a topic about trademark law that was based in common law, a lot of common law, and it had a different spin in every circuit. And the problem with that is you have to know what's going on in every circuit, every district court. It was a lot, and it was very hard. And so I had really kind of struggled to organize my thoughts and get all that together. But that always changed. We could talk about that, I guess, later. But that changed, I think, in the spring semester when I did the blogs. And I found that there was a whole different structure that I actually was really keen to. And that's when I really did well. And I think with the blogs, the structure and how you find ideas is different. But when I was doing the traditional track, I think the best way to brainstorm and to find things, if you don't really know what you're doing, is probably professors.
Yeah.
And being candid, I think all the journal editors that year were great. I just don't know if being able to pick topics, and especially when you don't have the fullest understanding of exactly what a quote unquote law review is, it's difficult because no one, Professor Lenhart said this best to me. No one comes into law school knowing how to write a brief or knowing how to write a law review article. And in fact, once you're done with law review, you probably won't, once you're with law school, you probably won't write another law review article. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Unless you're going into academia or want to do that. Yeah.
And that's such a small proportion of all of us,
people,
But my first semester I had a really loose structure in just that I had asked for topics and a professor had given me one. And I really had struggled with just the structure of all that.
Yeah. What about blog? Talk more about that.
The blogs were a lot better because I could write about anything that was going on at that given time. And you could write about it quickly too, and you get it posted quickly. So for instance, I remember I had a topic, I had already written like a first draft of it, but then Donald Trump got indicted and cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom. And I thought that was so interesting. And I was like, why are people not able to see this? And so I had written about that, and I went into a whole different like historical analysis. Again, I had already picked out a different topic, but I completely garbaged it.
That's awesome.
And it was actually really, really interesting because it stems from, like, you can't have cameras in federal courtrooms, but he had been indicted on a state charge. This is largely state by state. You know how, like, you know, Casey Anthony, for instance, that was pretty much filmed. That was not filmed, but it was on camera. And the same with a lot of things that are going on now in regards to, like, the Johnny Depp trial. That was a huge, big thing at the time. But then,
that's a great example,
yeah, the Johnny Depp trial was huge. And Gwyneth Paltrow was another thing, too. The Gwyneth Paltrow thing actually fell right around the same time that Donald Trump got indicted. And I wrote about both of them because one of them, the media was in the courtroom and it was very fascinating, but then Donald Trump otherwise wasn't. One of these has a bit more importance than, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow running into somebody at a skiing resort, presumably. But I had like done all this historical analysis, and it all came from the Lindbergh baby, actually. So back in the day, they let the press in, and the flashlights used to go off. The camera lights would go off, and it would disrupt the courtroom. There were cords everywhere. It actually ended up being a whole big thing. And so I was able to write about that like a week after it had happened, and it got published like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after. Because blogs are shorter, you don't have to be like the newest, most, you know, it just has to be interesting, and it has to be cool, and it has to be fun. And that to this day is one of my favorite blogs that I've written. And it's still like, you know, he just got, you know, he was just found guilty a few weeks ago. No one saw in the courtroom for that. But meanwhile, all these other cases have gone forward. And I genuinely do believe you shouldn't have cameras in the courtroom. But I wouldn't have ever thought that had I not had the opportunity to research that. And that's gone so far after this. Like, I was able to do that for 4 different subjects. And I loved that in the blog. But because it was so new and going on, you could find sources like that. You know, you could look at like MSNBC or something like that and find a little bit of background on why. And then you go into a secondary source and you could find it there. So because it was more topical, it was more interesting to research.
Yeah, and primary sources too, because like there's so much law with that as well. So it's like you I think that's like, I think you're hitting on like 2 things that like stand out to me when I've like just in like talking with like you guys and other friends on Law Review about like the importance of like finding a topic that you're interested in. Like you can go to outside sources, and I think that you hit the nail on the head. Going to outside sources is so important. Like I did that for my second semester traditional track article, where I spoke with a couple of practicing attorneys and a couple of professors. I spoke with Professor Mangan for the one I did in the fall, and he helped me finesse like so many things. And so you have that, but then also like you just have to be interested in it. And I think that's one of the cool things about blog. I didn't do blog, but I do wish I had. I loved traditional, and that format really worked for me. But I wish I could have had the opportunity to do blog, because you get to like dive into so many different things, like you're saying, which I think is really cool.
And the nice part about that too is every single interview, like because I was able to write 4 pieces for that one semester, I've never had a job interview that I didn't have something that I wrote about be pertinent to that job, because I wrote about 4 very different things. And each one of them you could fit in somewhere. They were the 4 interests that I had.
Yeah.
Every single job interview I've spoken about that. People look him up after the fact, and they're like, this kid is he's a demonstrable interest towards X or Y. It has served me so well, which is why I love the blog. I write very well for the blog. I think the idea of a 28-page paper too, or 25 for the journal is just so much harder to plan day one of the semester.
Daunting,
It is,
It's daunting. And so when you're writing like a 7 to 10 pager, I could do that in a day now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's
the things that we can do after.
I know.
In a day.
I would have made fun of me so hard in undergrad. Like,
but it's so funny what you're saying, because for me, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this test, like it's easier for me to think about a 25-page paper at the beginning of the semester. That's just how my brain works. So it's so cool how like you have these different formats and stuff. But yeah, so what's that like? Tell us like your process. Like, how did you come up with the topic for Read the People, and what was that kind of what was that process like for you with like just kind of getting things off the ground?
Yeah, so I did the traditional track. And for me, I thought coming up with more topics would be harder than finding just one that I could really get into.
Mm-hmm.
But I still really did struggle with finding something that was like new, that hadn't been written about, and that would be interesting. So I started with looking for circuit splits, because I feel like that's kind of classic law review topic, because it's something that's undecided and it's current, and you can kind of add something new to the conversation. And so I was just looking up circuit splits, and I found about the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which is something that I just never heard of before on an attorney blog site. And it was really interesting to me to find that there weren't really any sources about it. And so I thought this was something that I can kind of become a little bit of an expert on, and kind of look at it from more than just the circuit split level, but the whole like historical treatment of marijuana law and what's led to where we are now, and how this amendment has played a role in kind of keeping things in a stable spot while we still have it illegal at the federal level, but states are increasingly legalizing it every year.
So going off of, let's say, your topic about your thoughts on cameras in the courtroom, you stated that your opinion is they don't need to be there.
Yeah.
If that comes, like, let's say you send that off to, your fellow editors or anyone else for advice, and they maybe have a differing opinion on the thought of cameras in the courtroom, or is there a thinking of reevaluating your opinion? Or when it's something like that, where it's not really a legal issue, it's more of an opinion, do you feel that you have the approval to kind of stick to your guns when it comes to opinions like that?
Yeah, so my editor did disagree with me at first, but then I was right. And I just changed his opinion. But I've never found because I've actually written 6 blogs for the law review. I did 4 that semester, but then I actually just did 2 extra because I just had things to write about. But I've found in all of them that I've written, anything opinion piece wise has always just stayed. I've never been told I was wrong on the law. I think that just comes from, you're going to be right about the law. You know what I mean? Like, there's a very baseline standard. I would actually be curious to hear if you have experienced, if anyone's ever told you, like, as an editor, this just isn't right. I guess as a blog editor, I have had a writer who didn't get the law correct. It was over something I had interest in. I was just very frank with them. I was like, you just need to fix some of the inaccuracies here. I had a lot of experience in those areas of law, so it was very easy for me to do. They changed it. It wasn't a problem. For things that are opinion pieces, though, if you can back it up in a good way, so long as anyone can understand why you're saying the things you're saying, like the cameras in the courtroom, one of the arguments I made, well, if you let cameras in, what's going to stop the cameras from coming into a domestic violence situation? That's like, then people are going to be able to court TV, which is actually what goes on, is court TV goes into these courtrooms, like what happened with Gwyneth Paltrow, or the Alex Jones case was another one, or the Johnny Depp one. That was a serious intrusion on people's privacy right there. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard may be celebrities, but there were a lot of personal details in there that if that were in my life, I wouldn't want everybody to know. And now let's scale them down. They're not celebrities now. They are people in the Hamilton County court system. Do we really want those people's pain to be magnified on everybody's TV or everybody's YouTube channel for somebody else's entertainment? That's just wrong. Being able to make those arguments, regardless if somebody believes in one specific instance, like, oh, the president's indictment should be filmed. They can see that going into the Hamilton County system with a court TV just to film things for fun, kind of like Judge Judy, even though that's mostly, it's not fake, but everyone contracts to it. There's a huge difference. There is a good reason that you could make the argument both ways. And so I've never found, when there is a good reason both ways, somebody's opinion should be shut down and not. I've had a lot of editorial control on what I write.
So I would assume maybe back against your argument that, having cameras, I'm assuming not for me, but probably the pushback you probably received was, well, when it's something like the George Floyd case or something like the presidential indictment, where there's not only probably a large sum of people who don't believe that the court is going to conduct itself fairly, or case has such a stronghold on the community in which it happened that having the cameras there is a almost safety benefit, so that after the verdict comes down, there isn't a question of, I think we see that right now, and it does have a especially in today's environment. Is there wiggle room there, or do you think there is a precedent that could be set for the necessity for a transparency of that level in the courtroom, since there is such a pushback of trust with the traditional print or news media reporting on a subject matter like that?
Yeah, so I slightly address this as well. I think the primary mechanism for accountability in a judicial courtroom is going to be a judge's opinion. And I understand people, that isn't the answer that everybody's going to want to hear. It's not. But being candid with what you see with the way that TikTok can spin things now, the way that, you just look at the way politics is now, you can modify a video in any which way. And then the thing too is, yeah, you might let a camera into the courtroom, but no TV enterprise reporter TikTok show starts from the minute that you can and ends at the minute you stop, like the court proceedings stop. It's clipped. Everything is clipped. You can show things in a way that you want to show things. You're not educating the public by just giving them a 60-second blurb of something.
Absolutely. You need the full context.
You need the full context. And so that's what I really, really say is, yeah, if we did let them in, there's this transparency argument. We want everyone to be able to see what's going on so it's clear. I think that there is a really, really prime opportunity then for spin that actually harms the judicial system as it is. So I think that the primary source of an accountability should be an opinion, not necessarily letting people come in with their phones or with, a big camera to see what's going on.
By opinion, do you mean like the legal judicial opinion?
Yeah, a judge's opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Yeah, like a judge's order. A judge's opinion or a judge's order. So if there's something is going wrong and something is out there, that could be for the appellate courts to decide. And I also think letting them in. There was a case where I think it was in Chicago, but don't quote me for this. But there was a high-profile case, and the judge was effectively showboating to be the next Judge Judy.
Wow.
They'd found out that he had been approached by somebody for his opinion, like his appearance on the bench, and so he showboated for them, and it was a whole thing.
It's like an audition.
It is. That's
Wow.
exactly what it was.
I mean, they make $20 million a year as Judge Judy, so.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, right. Yeah. Well, something interesting that you mentioned in your piece that I thought was like interesting, kind of on the flip side of your whole thesis, was the fact that that it could increase education and educational, basically transparency and education about the whole of the legal system, because I think so many people, myself included, if you are not in the field, you don't see everything from beginning to end. So I almost wish there was I guess they could make a documentary about it, and you could. And heck, you could argue Jury Duty, the comedy that came out last year, was like a documentary into this.
Yeah, that's funny.
Actually, yeah. But no, I think about the idea of I do wish people could have more transparency into what a course of litigation looks like beginning to end. But maybe there's a way to just do that specifically or something instead of
Yeah, to push back a little bit on that too. Anyone's always available to go to the courtroom. You can always go and sit on most proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not advocating for the closing down of court proceedings whatsoever.
Mm-mm.
Everyone should be able to go in there and
Watch,
that sort of thing. Watch.
as a citizen.
Exactly. And that's exactly what's going on with the Trump stuff. And I think a lot of the argument, especially in the last few weeks, has been, well, if this were publicized and put on TV, then this would affect
Public
opinion.
Discourse, yeah.
People would be able to see everything. It's different when, you can see the witnesses that are presenting rather than reading a report about what Michael Cohen or what Stormy Daniels or what Donald Trump is saying on the well, Donald Trump didn't go on the stand, but when you hear those things, it's different to see it on a TV versus in writing.
Totally.
Yeah.
We could talk about this specific subject for the whole podcast, because even I feel that you're correct, but I also feel that relying on like a stenographer notes or the final write-up by the court or whatever to give either one enough context for the normal person who might not understand what's written in there. I do feel that having the ability to, I understand no one will use the whole video, but minds who want to get that context have a very accessible way to gain that context, especially if you can't travel or go to the courtroom to see it yourself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I get both sides of the argument, and I understand that. That's why you said then, if you can understand both sides, then both sides have the right to express their opinions with it. I think we've seen an unprecedented case where it comes to a former sitting president who comes out of the courtroom consistently disparaging the judge and the courtroom proceedings as being false, to where then without that additional context, being able to actually see what is going on, I think hurts in a different way. But I also agree that is a extremely finite perspective out of the hundreds of thousands of cases that happen.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. But I love that we got a glimpse of how you all discuss differences in opinions the way that most people should be able to discuss differences in opinions, which is understanding the other person's side while still communicating your side to help maybe better see a different viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Oh, and I think that's like with academic journals, like I think that's one of the really great opportunities that you have, and the fact that like we can use the word opinion, but really what we're doing is this isn't opinion based, it's legal based. Like we are writing pieces that are reliant on the law to either predict an outcome or to make an argument, and that's what the law does. And that's basically like the opportunity that I think a law review, and again, you in other academic situations, academic journals, you're doing similar things based on quantitative research and things like that. But it's cool.
A difficult subject matter, because in every legal proceeding, most of the time there's someone arguing the opposite side.
Right.
So
exactly.
It's never
Learning how
it's
to do
not
that.
it's not science, it's not mathematics where there's a guaranteed 1 + 1 outcome. It is my interpretation, or obviously my opinion of this legal proceeding means this. And I think that's why the legal field is such a unique space. Even with full context, the written law, there's appeals. There's ways to say, I don't believe this was done correctly. And I think that's an important piece of education that a lot of people outside of going to law school don't totally understand, because we don't usually see that in the TV we watch about the legal system. And the hype behind a case ends after the initial decision. Most people probably don't even realize that Trump is going to appeal, or Gwyneth Paltrow probably appealed, or whomever. I don't know if she won. Okay, she won. The other person did not pay attention to that case at all until she gets sued for goop. I don't know. But no, for those things, I think it is a really interesting thing that I wish we could instill in more of our regular education, is that way of civil discourse as it comes to the law, because it's set in stone that can always be rechiseled, or you read it in a different way. So I think that's very interesting. So if we go off of that, once you kind of find your topic, or you find that blog topic that you're interested in, what does that writing process look like? Do you start by looking at previous precedent that's been set for cases like this, or do you look back at your faculty that are around you or staff to give you support, or do you just jump right into the topic itself and then try to work your way backwards to how it fits into what's happening in the law previously?
I'll talk about the blog, and then if you want to talk about the journal, you were much more successful with the journal than I was. So, but what I did for the blog was very different from the way I did it from the journal and the blog. At the beginning, I was just like looking up topics. I was like reading 1 or 2 secondary sources or something, and just kind of like making it work. And it worked. But what I would do is I got better, is I would print out 10 different secondary source articles encompassing mine, which, if you don't know what a secondary source is, it's a thing like another academic journal has written about it, or it's another blog post or
basically
news articles.
anything that's not like the hard law.
Yeah.
like the case or the statute. Or
Not like well, I'd
Constitution.
do cases too, but the secondary sources I'd print out like 10, and then I would just read them. And by that time, I always called myself an expert in that thing. Again, cameras in the courtroom. Read 10 of them, different opinions, both going either which way, is commentaries on the other. It would be about 250 pages that I'd print out using the law review prints. But
Can you imagine that?
I'm graduated now, so it's not my problem. But yeah, so I print out the 10, and then I just read those, and then I kind of come up with it.
So then going off of that, when you hear a topic, let's say it's the cameras in the courtroom, I know obviously everyone immediately has an opinion in their head, but you say you print off both sides of the opinions.
Yeah.
Do you go into it with and this may change with a hard opinion in your head, and then you read both sides just to understand both sides? Or do you go into it with maybe a soft opinion of what your initial thought is, but sometimes after reading those secondary sources, you can flip your initial opinion after reading what others have said?
So originally I did go in thinking I would say that cameras should be allowed in the courtroom because I wanted to see what's going on with the arraignment. But then after reading, I actually flipped. I think it depends. So much of it
That's
is
really cool.
topic by topic.
Yep.
In many ways, like some of the other like more intricate stuff, I've written about like crypto stuff and like blockchain and NFT stuff. And typically that I tend to sway opinions less just because it is so just more so objective than what's going on with the cameras in the courtroom. Or I wrote about I worked in small claims court for 2 years before I got to law school. I wrote about the right to counsel in small claims court. I pretty much have my opinion set there because it's based on 2 years of experience. If it's a newer area, I can flip, but I found that if it's objective or something like that, it's a lot easier to.
So then, Tess, let's jump over to you when it comes to the long form, which is definitely something where you not only have to do way more research into a topic because you're writing more, but also I'm assuming it's much harder to, one, maybe find a topic that you were willing to write that much about, or two, the flip of an opinion. I feel like maybe you come in with a little bit stronger of an initial feeling when it comes into an article like this, as opposed to a blog where it could be something that just generally interests you. So how do you find that topic of something you're going to spend a lot more time on, dedication, edits, all of those things? How do you either find that first subject, and then how do you go about researching and writing about it?
Yeah, so I definitely feel like I would look into a bunch of different topics and do a little research on each one and see, like, is there still something that I think there was here? And there were a good number of topics that I would abandon because I'm like, oh, this seems like it was already written about, or I just don't, actually not as interesting as I originally thought it was. But when I did find my topic, I just kind of read as much as I could find about it. And I came in with an initial feeling of what I thought, how it should be resolved. And that ended up not changing, but I was definitely open to like where the research would lead me. I think that's kind of the mark of like a good topic too, where you are like open to see where the sources are going and not just kind of like finding what supports what you already believe. And so I just kind of read up on both sides of the circuit split and the whole historical backdrop and everything I could find about it, and then kind of made an outline that just made sense to me of like, what do we need to tell like the whole story? And then after I came up with that outline, I would go back and do more research on each piece of that just to get like as full of a picture as I could on that topic.
So when you're writing the outline, are you writing a law school outline or a journalistic kind of type of outline when you're reading about the circuit splits and things like that?
Kind of like just like the different headings of what I want to do, and then just a bunch of like hyperlinks to sources that I would go back to and then dive deeper in when I got to that specific part.
So much more of a traditional type of article or outline, not so much the one that you learn in your 1L year of outlining the case or maybe the cases you're looking at.
Right,
okay,
yeah.
Awesome. And then why did you choose this, this subject matter for this year? What made you feel that this topic was either coming to the forefront of Cincinnati and Ohio, or just the country in general? Or was it more of you saw the unfair treatments with these laws? What kind of catalyzed your want to pursue this beyond just maybe the legal uniqueness or interest? Was there something more on the back end of it, of what maybe the reflection after you write it might be?
Sure. So I guess I should explain really quick what the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment is, because I didn't know what it was, and I don't think a lot of people really do, because there wasn't a lot on there. But basically, since 2015, Congress has added this amendment to their annual Consolidated Appropriation Acts, saying that any funds allocated to the Department of Justice can't be used to prevent states that have legalized medical marijuana from implementing their laws authorizing the use, distribution, possession, and cultivation. And so we know that it's illegal at the federal level, but the states are continually legalizing it, and this is kind of what's been keeping everything together. So the states obviously have their own $1 million industries at this point, and it's what's stopping the federal government from coming in and enforcing the CSA against that conduct? And turns out it's the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. And so I think it's kind of in a transitionary space right now, where I think eventually this issue will get mooted when they decide to reschedule or legalize. But right now it seems to be kind of what's holding things together. And the courts had interpreted the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment either with a strict compliance approach or a substantial compliance approach, where if these businesses aren't complying strictly with every single regulation, then you can come in and enforce the CSA, versus the substantial compliance approach, which just made more sense to me. If we're going to not prevent the states from implementing their laws, and we have to let them enforce their own laws and decide what those penalties should be when there are small issues of non-compliance, versus blatantly using the state laws to shield unlawful interstate conduct.
So this was much more from the business point of view, or how they're able to continue working when this unique case of something being legal in a state and illegal federally. That was more of the point of view of the article than less of the impact on maybe the general public.
Yeah, more so on just how can people be engaging in this conduct without this constant threat of I'm going to go to jail for going to my job or running my business, that the state has chosen to legalize. And I thought that was really interesting, and just seemed how is this kind of working, and how can we maybe give it the effect that it needs to have in order to kind of let the states do their thing as the laboratories of their own regimes.
And weren't you cited by who was she cited by? I'm sorry.
I was, yeah.
Who was
a district court judge in Mississippi cited my article for what the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment is and what it does, and I think part of that was because there was really no scholarly sources about that. In that case, actually wasn't dealing with the circuit split itself. It was actually a First Amendment commercial speech case where they were trying to use the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment to say, oh, this isn't illegal conduct, so that our commercial speech should be protected. And the judge basically used my article to say, no, the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment didn't legalize it. It just allows the states to kind of do their own thing while it's still federally illegal.
So we'll talk about that, and I'm sure there's been other people who may have had their articles used in court. But what does it mean to be cited or to be used in that way? What does that not only mean for that article? What does that mean for you? What does that look like? Is that something you put on a resume? Is that something you talk about? Why is that such an enjoyable experience to see that article be used for maybe not legal standard, but a way to, your opinion, your thoughts, your writing was the best way this judge thought to explain this to the court? What does that feel like, or how does that bolster you as you go on?
I was definitely really excited when I found out about it, because I think a lot of times with law review, sometimes you go into it thinking people might not really read this or really care if they're not into the law.
Into the void.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you spend all this time.
Exactly. Yeah. You put so much time and effort into the piece, and then when it's actually used for something, and it's a really cool feeling, and also I did this for a reason, and it's actually being considered for what it is, and definitely something you'd put on your resume too, I think.
I think that she's underplaying it. That's a really big deal.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. No, I mean, I remember when you shared that you saw that it happened, and it's so cool because literally the work is doing its job. That's why we do this. We do this in order to try to make an impact on the law and on society and on the world, and that happened, and it's so cool. It was yeah,
Okay.
like, oh,
How do you even figure out that happens?
Thank you. My next question.
Yeah.
So I was just curious to see like how many downloads I had gotten, and so I just
Yeah.
Googled my article and I
Yeah.
saw that it said cited by one on it, and so I went on Google Scholar
Mhm.
and it kind of takes you to where it was cited, and I was really surprised to see that it was a district court opinion and not just like someone's blog or like something like that. So
yeah.
And the thing too that will never ever get recorded just as you can't, but is how many people are reading that and using it for the actual
You
substance.
should
Mhm.
just end this. That was literally my next question.
So that's a really big deal. Like, and the thing too is like, it's especially big too because we're law students, and I
Yeah.
know practitioners who will read them, but not necessarily because it just looks different if you're citing a law student.
Mhm.
But you're a law student, and they're like, you know what? We're gonna cite you
Yeah.
anyway because it's right, it's good, and it's
Yeah.
correct. And you know what you're doing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
That's what that
absolutely.
means, Tess. Not that you didn't know that. You knew that
Yeah,
already,
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
just hyping her up.
Yeah.
We're coming to an end to this episode, and I wanted to kind of, I'm assuming all of, your article that you had written, the blogs that you have written, those are all still available for people when they want to go back and look at those. So those will be linked in all of this stuff, but also go read them. It helps you not only understand the law, but as Jacob talked about, there's some of those topics that could just be enjoyable to learn more about, to digest the law in a unique way.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, especially when there's topics such as, this new industry that's definitely going to be popping up in Ohio soon.
Yeah,
Learn
it
more
did
about
just right
that.
after you wrote that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get an education on what that means. You don't obviously have to read the whole article, but you can definitely start learning about how that's going to impact, if you're an Ohio, listener, what that means. And, these students are working extremely hard. They're hopefully making changes in the law, or hoping to. So definitely support them. Is there any last words you all want to say as exiting, graduated students of UC Law, alum of the Law Review? Any last words to someone who might be potentially thinking about law school at UC or not, and just someone who might have an interest in Law Review? Any last words from each of you all?
I would say for people considering law review, like everyone hears how much work it is and how like tedious it can be sometimes, but I think when the final product is in its final form, it really is like satisfying to have come through that whole process and for it all to come together in the end.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, and there's data behind this too. There's an Above the Law article that was sent out to like 10,000 people. What looks the best on a resume? And it comes down in law school to law review. That's just the way it is. I think that it's ultimately served someone who is, being completely candid, a very mediocre student in law school. Very well. It's gotten me into doors and rooms and interviews that I otherwise would not have been in there because it does serve as a litmus test. I don't like that it does, but it does. I recommend anyone in law school go ahead and try for it anyway. I didn't think I was going to get in, and I did, and it's definitely the most impactful part of my resume so far.
And I think that's a good point you said, is I want everyone who's listening to this to understand that law review is not the same dynamic as taking a test or being able to memorize and regurgitate the law in the classroom setting. It is a completely different skill that I think someone who can be a vastly successful lawyer, even if maybe circling in buttons on a test isn't where they strive, but I think you've seen that it gives you confidence in that space of being a lawyer, because now there's this part of it that you are seeing your talents and success shine in. So for the other two, did you see that same thing where a different part of you was opened up when it came to law review, of a skill maybe you didn't realize you had, or maybe a skill you thought you had and you really had to work on, because it is a little bit different than a traditional kind of journalistic based article you might write?
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing, so Jacob kind of mentioned the resume thing, and I think that law review is helpful for that. I think that there are other things too that like.
There's a complete professional.
Yeah,
but it always
yeah,
helps.
yeah,
It never
yeah.
hurts.
Yeah. I think so. Regarding just different kind of things that it allowed me to experience, I think so much of law school, your first year you come in and you have the classes kind of set out for you. And it's going to be this way no matter where you go to law school. You take the 1L classes and then you go into 2L and you can start to explore more. You get to actually pick your classes and you get to kind of dive into areas that you're interested in. And law review lets you do that and more. Like it actually lets you dive into areas that, yes, you might be interested in, but it also might be something you're never going to practice. That's what I was able to go into. I wanted to use law review when I was an associate member to really just look into things I was interested in, even if they're not, squarely in the corporate transactional space. And I'm so glad I did that because it allowed me to kind of have that outlet. And honestly, it felt creative because I was able to piece together this, I was able to create this thesis on something I was interested in, even though I knew that talking about employment law wasn't something I was probably going to be doing in my career. So it was an opportunity to learn about things that matter to me in a way that was really unique. And also, just the skill of legal writing is so incredibly important, whether you're doing a long form piece that's 25 pages or you're doing something that's 7 to 10 pages, because all of those skills are going to be used in a legal career, whether you're writing long form briefs or whether you're writing something for like your law firm's website, which are going to be shorter pieces. So all of these skills are really critical. And it's just legal writing. It's just the foundation of the career, really. So being able to learn how to do that more effectively was so helpful. My editors, my 2L year, were just so good at. Actually, I just had the same editor both semesters, Maddie Blessy, and Maddie was awesome at helping me. Kind of like when I thought I was saying what I thought I was saying, she was like, "Actually, I don't really hear. Like, you need to go into this more and detail this more and make it clearer." So it helps you do that, which is just critical. And also, you just get to meet a lot of really great people. And regardless of the role that you take on your 3L year, you get to interact with folks who maybe you never would have otherwise. And you get to make friendships and you get to just collaborate well. And that is a huge, huge skill about the profession as well.
Yeah, I found that my writing has never been, it substantially increased by, my skills substantially increased by the time I started from the time now. It's almost completely different the way I write. And also shout out to Maddie too. She was a great editor as well. She's
fabulous.
Really good content wise. Like helping structure things.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah.
And something too is it's not just law review either too. I think that a lot of people do forget to put this in context too. There are other law reviews at a school as well. Like we have technically 3, I think. Well, we have 2 secondary journals, the Immigration and Human Rights Law Review and then the Intellectual Property and Computer Law Journal here as well. Both of them are fantastic as well. They do functionally some of the similar stuff that we do. They're just more narrowed in scope. And then there's the Human Rights Quarterly. Yeah, so there's the Intellectual Property and Computer Law Journal and then the Immigration and Human Rights Law Journal and then Human Rights Quarterly, which are 3 other journals that you can get involved in here at the College of Law. And all 3 of them do incredible work, and all 3 of them look great on resumes, and all 3 of them are, they produce blogs and articles. I think Human Rights Quarterly just has an editorial function, but all 3 of them are great. Cincinnati has a really good opportunity for anyone that's interested in writing, for everyone to get involved.
Well, perfect. That's where we will end. Thank you all for joining us and explaining to everyone how fun law review is.